Good evening, Madam President. It's 6 p.m. I've started the recording.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Welcome, everyone. We're going to be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Dr. Henderson.
You have to unmute, Mr. Henderson.
My apologies. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please stand for a moment of silent meditation. Thank you.
Thank you. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Burton,
Here.
Ms. Green,
Here.
Dr. Henderson,
Here.
Mr. Levenstein,
Here.
Ms. Maida,
Here.
Ms. Mineo,
Here.
Mr. Stridiron,
Here.
Mr. Walker,
Here.
Mr. Howard.
Here.
Thank you. Be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby recesses into executive session for the following purpose. Matter made confidential under FERPA, employment history of particular individuals, matters leading to the employment of particular individuals, collective bargaining under the Taylor Law, NTA, NASA, CSCA, and to obtain advice from legal counsel. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Burton,
Yes.
Ms. Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levenstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
Yes.
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron,
Yes.
Mr. Walker.
Yes.
Please be advised that this executive session will be 1.5 hours in length. See you all.
Good evening, Madam President. I started the recording back on.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Welcome, everyone. Sorry we're a little late. It was a long executive session, but I apologize. I'd like to turn this over to our acting superintendent, Mr. Forget.
Thank you, Madam President, and good evening. This evening, we have a few presentations. Our first presentation is about virtual learning. And if we could bring the PowerPoint up, I would appreciate it. So at our last meeting, we were asked to consider what would a virtual learning opportunity look like in the district for our students. And our team worked pretty diligently to begin the research process to determine whether that's a viable option. And as a result, can you go to the next slide, please? And go to the next slide, please. What we learned was there are parameters by which we would have to work under that were provided by the New York State Education Department. So virtual options are allowed under certain circumstances. And I'll preface that with the main goal is to have all students in person for live instruction, face-to-face with the classroom teacher. The parameters by which we can consider a virtual model would be for situations where a student has a medical condition or is determined to be medically fragile based on a very, very specific definition defined by the district medical director and school health facilitators. The other opportunity for virtual learning would be for individuals who have a very specific need. And that need would have to be defined based on specific standards established by the district. And it would be defined based on looking at how well the student performed and in an in-person environment during a traditional schooling versus how well they performed in a fully virtual environment, and comparing the two to see whether the virtual environment was truly a better option for certain students. How would we implement it after those two populations are created, the medically fragile and those that would benefit from virtual versus online based on specific data? We would have to determine what is our capacity in the district to deliver an in-house program. Do we have the infrastructure? Are the teachers, do we have enough teachers to deliver it? The continuity of learning. How do we ensure the integrity of the in-class, in-person instruction, and then design a virtual model that doesn't take away from that in-person model? That has to be assessed, and we have to really take a close look at that. The second piece would be that we would have the opportunity to engage with the local BOCES to partner with them to deliver instruction for the students. We also began to take a look at the medically fragile, and we currently have a model for medically fragile that is a 100% online, virtual learning environment that is live streamed into the classrooms. Can we go to the next slide, please? So Mr. Baer is going to talk to you a little bit about, as a result of doing this dive into looking at these options, how we are transforming our medically fragile definition. Mr. Baer?
Thank you, Mr. Forget. So we previously reported that we have offered a virtual model for medically fragile students based on very specific criteria, and that's offered on the district website. And we have dealt with each of those on a case-by-case basis based on students who have acute issues, medical issues that cause them to maybe be immunocompromised. We're extending that to parents and family members as well under the same, it's aligned to the same criteria. So it's families where there is an acute issue where there is active treatment. So we are distinguishing between chronic conditions and those that are active and that cause immunosuppressant concerns. So the examples given are chemotherapy in families that we've had where someone might have a bone marrow transplant, where literally the family member has no immune system during that time. So that's the definition we're expanding to families. We've got a lot of phone calls, but we're distinguishing between the acute and the chronic and their impact on your immunosystem.
And the instructional model for those particular students that are at home, they are receiving live streamed instruction from our in-district classroom teachers. Can we go to the next slide, please? So what if we expand the virtual option based on CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics and the New York State Education Department guidelines? What would that look like? So in order for us to do that, we have to define what is truly in the best interest of our students. And we surveyed our families and we received just over 1,000 requests for consideration for a virtual model. Our task right now is to take a look at those requests and try to determine what is the most appropriate way to determine the specific model that would best suit those particular students, given the two parameters, medically fragile and the expectation that we have an understanding that when the students were in a live in-person instructional format, they did less better than when they were in a virtual model. So we have to make that distinction. We have to define that the virtual model was definitely a better opportunity for certain individual students to learn. And that's the data poll that we're working on right now. So how are we going to do that? We're going to work with a committee that will be assigned or created. It will have voices of teachers, and we'll have voices of administrators, and we'll have voices of parents and students and community, and we will begin to explore what that should look like. This can't be a top-down model. This has to really be designed and developed based on the unique needs of our student population. So we're going to follow the shared decision-making component that we have adopted in the district, and we will engage a team to get going on that particular work. Next slide, please. So before we do that, we really have to assess our capacity. So when you look at the different educational programs that we offer in the district that are uniquely aligned with our students, we have to take a look at, do we have the capacity in a virtual environment and an in-person environment to address the specific needs of our English language learners? Do we have the ability and the capacity to deliver special education services in a virtual and an in-person situation? Do we have the opportunity to deliver culturally responsive instruction to students in both of these models? Can we provide social and emotional developmental health in a virtual model and in an in-person model? We have to make sure that you have integrity of instruction and programs for students, whether they're in person or in a virtual situation. And then determining the students experiencing pandemic-induced trauma, do we have the capacity to address those particular needs as well? When we take a look at other key considerations, it's assessing the availability of supplementary resources to be provided in the home. Do we have an adult in the home that we can work with to guide and provide support so that they may support their child in the home to engage in that online learning platform? All of these things are things we have to really dig deep into to explore so that we are providing continuity of learning between the in-person and the virtual environment. Next slide, please. So how are we going to go about this? So this is a pretty aggressive timeline, but I think it's doable. So we're going to assemble the team of educators that will begin to explore this particular opportunity. We will determine the standards by which we will create a virtual academy for those particular populations of students, the medically fragile and those that benefit from virtual learning versus in person. We'll determine the initial list of students, and then we'll make sure that their IEP services, any 504 plans and graduation requirements are taken into consideration as we design that platform. We will then address any contractual items with the appropriate bargaining units to make sure that we're in compliance and everyone's on the same page and supporting what's in the best interest of our students. The next part would be doing a study around the local BOCES, and I will tell you that we just found out today at 3 o'clock that there is a BOCES in New York State that's willing to work with us to provide this particular service. We just made this connection at 3 o'clock today, so that conversation needs to be explored beginning tomorrow. But there is a BOCES service that would provide a K-12 virtual environment for those two particular groups of students. If that does not work out, we'll continue and create the opportunities in district, determining what the professional development needs are, securing the instructional space, taking a look at the curriculum resources. After we've identified the students, we'll know what the resources are that they need, and hopefully have an open house and kickoff in February. This may seem like an aggressive timeline. It may seem like it's taking too long, But in order for us to do it and ensure the integrity of the instructional program being provided to our students, we believe that this is appropriate, even though it is aggressive. Why February? Well, if we're hosting our own academy and owning it and delivering it, we believe that the December graduates that are coming out of the higher ed institutions would be primed and ready for us to consider recruitment because we are in a teacher shortage area as we speak. Finding and getting those particular students or teachers in place would be critical. The other thing I just want to mention is these students that we select will end up in this virtual environment, but it doesn't guarantee the same teacher. So the teacher that the student is currently being educated with now, there's no guarantee that that same teacher will then teach these students in a virtual world. That all has to be discussed and considered. So there are a lot of variables, there are a lot of questions, but I can tell you that we took your request seriously. We provided you with a timeline, and we're following the parameters of law and the New York State Education Department. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Forget, and thank you, senior staff. I know this was a difficult thing to do, and I really think that you've really thought this through well. That's my own opinion. So board members, any questions or comments? Mr. Levinstein.
Thank you, Madam President. And yes, I do applaud the hard work that went into this. So I just have a couple of general questions how students may be affected if they decide, if their family decides to go to this virtual instruction. So are the students going to have what they had last year, a hybrid, then a 4-day schooling, and then 11:59 sign in or get work done? Is that going to be the same going forward if they're in the virtual model? And my other question is, how are we going to deal with like pre-K and kindergarten kids in this type of situation? Thank you.
So I'll start with the last. What we found last year was it was very difficult for pre-K and kindergarten students to learn the platform of virtual learning. A lot of work will have to go into that in working with the adults that will be in the household supervising those students to be able to have them prepared to engage in that particular learning. However, the model will be a 5-day virtual instruction model. There will not be a Wednesday kind of common planning period for teachers. It would be 5 days of instruction for the students. And at this point in time, we're not considering 11:59. Assignments will be due when assigned by the teacher, as determined in the best interest of the students by the teachers.
Thank you.
Mr. Stridiron, I see your hand.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for your team efforts in putting this together so quickly. I do have a question. The survey that went out to the parents stated that the option was for virtual for the whole year rather than for a certain period of time. How many parents opted for that over in person? And you would have to think that if the option was for a shorter period of time, you would have had more signups. And then another question would be, or another statement would be, whatever you choose to do with virtual learning, I think it would be important that there's a separation between the teachers who teach in-person teaching and the teachers that teach virtual learning. There can't be a combination in the classroom for, I would say, most subjects, because it's just an overwhelming amount of work. And I hope that's taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stridiron. And your question about the way the survey was written, with it requiring a full year commitment, we can address that. We can resurvey if we need to. And I think that we have received some of those comments from others, so I appreciate you bringing that up. Yeah, our intention is to have dedicated teachers to continue in an in-person and dedicated teachers in a virtual. for continuity of learning, which is also a mandate and expectation from the state. So thank you for reinforcing those.
Ms. Green?
Although we are looking at the option of those parents who want it, I am assuming that if needed, like say next week sometime, they decided that all students had to be virtual, the district is prepared to actually go virtual at the drop of a dime if need be, because with this pandemic, you never know. So I'm just questioning if, like I said, next week, if they decided that all students had to be virtual, would the district be prepared to do something like that at that moment in time?
If we needed to pivot based on a health concern, as identified by the Orange County Department of Health, we would absolutely be able to pivot.
Thank you.
Mr. Howard?
Thank you, Madam President. Ms. Forbes, I'd like to congratulate you and your team on the job that you did in a short period of time. And I think it was a great idea to send out the questionnaire to the parents. But my question is, have the teachers been a part of this conversation? And if not, when will they be? Because, you know, they have the boots on the ground. They experienced this last year as in a virtual environment. They know the issues where they know where the problems lie. And I was curious, have they been a part of this process, or when they will be a part of that conversation?
They will be a part of the process as we move forward. They were not in the original survey. So now that we have a target population of students that could be considered, we may be resurveying them to include others that may not have wanted it for the full year, as Mr. Stridiron brought up. Once we get that data, then a team will be assembled of teachers, administrators, parents, students, and they will begin to assist us in the assessment of the capacity of the district to do this particular work. You're absolutely right. The people doing the work need to inform the work. The people that are doing the work need to tell us what they need in order to do it better. So it should not be a top-down senior staff decision or direction. It should include the voices of everyone that will be affected by this. And that will happen as soon as we move into the next phase of this.
Thank you, Mr. Forget.
Mr. Forget? Oh,
You're muted,
myself.
ma'am.
I'm sorry. I don't see any more questions, so why don't you continue? Thank you, Mr. Forget and your team.
Thank you, Ms. Manel. The next item really talks about COVID data update. You're going to get a more expansive update this particular meeting, but you'll get a much more precise and data specific update as we move forward. One of the things that we heard from some of the feedback was that the pandemic is affecting a lot of people in very different ways, and instruction has to be looked at in addition to safe and healthy environments for students to learn, for teachers to teach, for administrators to lead, for parents to be a part of the system. And you can't just look at instruction without looking at a safe and healthy environment. So we're going to do a little bit more with you this evening, sharing with where we are with the safe and healthy environment, because that is connected to teaching and learning. So Mr. Bear and team, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Forget. Good evening, members of the board, senior team, and the community. I'm going to provide a series of slides that kind of give some data today to kind of understand really where we are with regard to the pandemic and the impact it's having in our buildings. So the first slide really is just to kind of remind ourselves, you know, what's happened over the last 30 days. We were able to open up school fully for all 11,000 scholars, all the scholars in our district, and do it in person for the first time in 18 months. You've heard before that we have a very strong pre-K program. Last year, during both virtual and hybrid, we did not have a fully enrolled pre-K program. We not only have a fully enrolled pre-K program, we have a robust waiting list that we're working through. So once families heard that we were going in person, we then witnessed the onslaught of families who wanted to come in and have that experience for their pre-K students. We're happy to report that NFA Evening School has begun. Last year, the NFA Evening School was fully virtual, even when we did pivot to hybrid, because it was just the best model at the time. And now we're having back to where we're in person for all the programs. The credit recovery, credit accrual, our quarterly recovery program when that begins will be in person. Our WEO and EPI program for our students who are older, who need some alternative education. All those programs will be done virtually. And as we know, we're happy to report that interscholastic sports and extracurricular activities have returned. We've all been at the football games, which last year was not feasible under the pandemic. And we were able to have 2 games already, and happy to report last week we won against Middletown. So just to remind ourselves that kind of how we've approached this work and what we're going to kind of display today, the data around what the CDC has decided was the 8 prevention strategies for COVID-19. So there you have a list of the 8. I'm going to concentrate today on the first 5 and provide some data to kind of show where the district is with regard to these prevention strategies that are outlined by the CDC. Next slide. So at the top are 2 quotes from the CDC Reopening Guide, and I think it's important to kind of highlight those in understanding really where we're at and why do we choose in person fully, as did all districts in New York State, because it says, according to the CDC guidelines, that the schools really play a critical role in equity and really around the learning and health of students, and especially the students who were disproportionately affected by COVID. We've heard time and time again, there were a number of students that flourished during the pandemic when we were virtual and hybrid, but we also know that there were many more students who really did not flourish at all. Our E&L students, some of our students with special needs, our pre-K students, our kindergarten and first grade students. Clearly, they did not flourish in the way because they could not adapt to the virtual model. And that disproportionality is something, that equity component is something that we have to take seriously in whatever model we design. The second bullet is really important too, because why did we open schools? Why did the CDC, the New York State Education Department, the New York State Department of Health say that the best model is in person if we can pull it off? Because they did studies that showed transmission rates within the school setting with those multiple mitigation strategies are typically lower than or similar to community transmission levels. We've heard about outbreaks throughout the country. We've heard them in the South. Oftentimes it's because those districts may not have introduced the mitigation strategies required under or recommended by the CDC. So this shows some data that really kind of supports kind of where we're at. I was trying to understand, based on that quote, how do I demonstrate to the public and to the board where we stand in relationship to our community? So we did, this is not data that is provided by the Department of Health, but if there's this notion that we are not better or worse off with regard to exposure and transmission in schools, how do I demonstrate that to you? So what we did was we looked at the number of active cases of COVID on September 27th in Orange County. And then we compared that to the overall population of the 3 municipalities. It's not a perfect data point because, as you know, the Newburgh and Lawrence City School District does have a little bit of Cornwall and a little bit of Washingtonville, but primarily our population is made up of the 3 municipalities, which is making up about 90,000 or so community members. So when you compare the actual number of students who were positive, which was 215 against that number, 0.2% of the citizens of our large school district were actively or had active positive cases as of 9/27. I'll explain the rolling average, why we didn't go in that direction right now. But you compare that to that same data point on 9/27 for the school district, we had the same exact amount. At that time, we had 11,000 students enrolled and we had 18 active cases. Why we decided to use that data point versus the rolling average is because rolling average is really done by the Department of Health based on the number of tests, COVID tests given in our community versus how many of those tested positive. While we know what that looks like in Orange County, it's 4.4% is currently the 7-day rolling average. There's no way to really capture the data point of how many students and employees of the Newburgh and Lawrence City School District were tested and how many of those tested positive. So that's why we decided to go in this direction, just to give you some perspective of whether or not we're better or worse. And as you can see, just as the CDC said, we're no better, no worse than the community. We are not an area where we're seeing transmission and community spread in our schools. Since September 5th, just go back, I'm sorry, we have had 56 students. So I know there's been a lot of letters. There's a sense that we have so many children who are tested positive. It's been 56. That represents or comprises less than 0.5% of our student population, which is 11,000 students. I use September 5th. People say, well, we started school September 9th because we had students that were active prior to September 9th that we had to account for. There were 9 students that were already positive that came to our attention that did not attend school because they were isolated at the time. And as you see, there were 19 employees since that time, which barely represents less than 0.15 of 1%. At the bottom, it's important to also talk about how we derive this information. We get all our information from students based on community. We do not test students. So it's based on information provided to us by families or by the Board of Health. And it's important to also note that of the 56 students, 40 of them were in school within 48 hours of testing positive, 48 hours of testing positive, which is the standard applied by the Department of Health. 16 of those, the 9 that I just talked about, were not. Therefore, they did not have the potential to transmit COVID to their peers. Next slide. So these are the other prevention strategies and the data that we'd like to look at today. So I'm going to let Dr. Roman talk about the first one, which is our vaccination.
Thank you, Mr. Baer. So we've had the opportunity to partner with several medical clinics in the Orange County area. And today we've been able to provide 5 vaccination drives for a total of 660 people we've been able to make contact with and been able to provide the vaccinations to. That includes both students as well as adults, family members. At the present time, we've been able to engage our nursing program, our students and our staff from that program at the high school. They've actually been able to provide support and some real life experiences to our students. So we've been greatly appreciative of the staff and the students from that program. The next vaccination site is scheduled for October 12th at the main campus, and that's going to be held from 3 to 4:45 p.m.
Thank you, Dr. Roman. So to continue on, the other 2 strategies discussed is the correct use of masks and social distancing. We sent out a survey, a perceptual survey to all of our employees in the Newburgh district. That data was then reviewed. It was due as of yesterday at 12, and we went through it as a central team. And this is the perceptual data, which right now is the baseline data based on the first month of school. So as you see about the consistent and correct mask use, which is one of the prevention strategies, you see that there's promising numbers around classroom and how masks are being used by the adults. We recognize that hallways right now are perceived as one of the areas of concern, and we've taken measures in each of the buildings to address that. Again, this is baseline data based on the first month of school and how the employees are seeing that. We're going to continue to collect this data every month for the rest of the year to see if as we apply new strategies or we adapt to some of the concerns, whether staff are seeing these concerns any differently. As far as social distancing, you can see that how the employees perceive whether or not we are complying at 3 feet, whether we're complying in the classrooms versus 3 feet in the cafeteria, and then 3 to 6 feet in the cafeteria. So again, we recognize that the perception sometimes is that classrooms are less than 3 feet. We've worked with every building that has those perceptions. We found out that sometimes those perceptions were not accurate. And other times it was really a matter of just rearranging classrooms to ensure that we maintain 3 feet. And we can talk about that later. Next is screening tests. So as you know, the Board of Education in August passed a resolution requiring that we test weekly, screen weekly the unvaccinated employees. In week 1, we're on our 3rd week, but we have data for the first 2 weeks. We did test 272 employees. This past week, we did 254. What's missing from that slide is the fact that out of 526 screens, we only had 4 positive tests. So it worked in that we were able to find folks who may have been potential transmissions, but it's relatively low to the overall number of tests that were given. Finally, as you know, one of our obligations is when we have contact tracing and we have close contact, we are obligated to quarantine. As of 9/28, as of today, there are currently 104 students that are quarantined, which only represents less than 1% of our entire student population. And currently only 2 employees are quarantined, which represents again, 0.1%. So again, I think it's important to recognize, while we totally respect the concerns and the anxiety of the community, there's a number of promising data points that we just went through. Next is the ventilation, which is one of the 8 strategies, and I'll let Dr. Spindler talk through this slide.
Thank you. The district conducted an audit based on the recommendations of the Department of Health regarding ventilation strategies. These recommendations we use as a monitoring tool, and we will be consistent in utilizing the tool we created based on these recommendations. And 3 buckets of those recommendations are ventilation and filtration, recommendation of mechanical ventilation within the classrooms, and our filtration centralized HVAC systems. And we want to highlight some mitigation strategies that we used in relation to ventilation, which is that we purchased 50 portable air scrubber units initially when school opened, and we ordered an additional 80 more to make sure that 1 HEPA unit of these portable air scrubbers is located in each of our nurses' offices. If the square footage of the nurse's office is larger than the capacity of the air scrubber, then we will add an additional scrubber. We also wanted to make sure that in the event a unit is disabled for any reason, that we are able to provide that classroom with a unit as the demand and need is there. We also needed to have purchased portable units for any staff member or student that needs to have one for medical reasons in close proximity to their area. We inspect the ventilators at least once a month, and we make sure that the outside air or the air handler is opened at 100%. We'll reduce it to 50% when the cold weather arrives, but right now with the warm weather, we're able to keep it at 100%. We also increase the amount of hours in which we're flushing fresh air into the building. So 2 hours prior to students entering the building, we are flushing the air out. Know that the univents circulate fresh air every 15 minutes for 4 times per hour. And every classroom has a minimum of 2 windows with working and operating screens. Obviously, we've always speak about the MERV 13 in all of our units district-wide. We replace the filters 30 to 45 days, and our air conditioning window units are adjusted to outside air. Windows are open and encouraged to be opened daily, as well as doors for cross ventilation. And as I said, we will continue to monitor the strategies and continue to increase ventilation in our school systems. That concludes my portion.
Thank you, Dr. Spindler, and that concludes the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you all. Board members, any questions or comments? Mr. Levinstein?
I would just like to thank Mr. Forget and his team for his comprehensive report on the health of our students, our staff, and our buildings. Thank you.
Anyone else? Comments? Thank you all. Mr. Forget?
Thank you, Madam President. And our final conversation this evening will be Dr. Spindler sharing with you the CRSA and the ARP plan. We've had some individuals that have requested, so what is the district doing with all that money? So we would like an opportunity to share with you our spending plan and how we derived at these particular recommendations. So at this point, Dr. Spindler, take it away.
Thank you very much. Next slide. So CRSA is our Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation Act. It was the second stimulus money provided by the federal government to school systems. We will be receiving approximately $12.7 million in this stimulus over a little over 2 years. Our application has recently been approved by the state. It's very exciting. The monies have not been released, but we are anticipating that 20% of the monies will be released shortly so that we can start to address the learning loss, utilize it to continue those mitigation strategies that we spoke about, upgrading and improving our air quality, preserving educational related jobs, and really giving students an opportunity to participate in more educational opportunities after school, weekends, and during break times. Next slide, please. This slide may be familiar to you because as we were building the budget last year, we knew that these funds were going to be funneled into our school system, and we wanted to make sure that we were meeting the needs of our scholars in addressing the learning loss, as well as preserving educational jobs. So 4.4 million of the funding, we are going to maintain, restore, and actually increase staffing. And you can see there, elementary teachers and secondary teachers, as well as PPS members, nurses, attendance aides, custodians, and maintenance workers, and extra earnings for monitors to keep up with the street engagement teams, because we saw some successes with it last year, and also to support a medically fragile program. And Mrs. Moriarty?
Thank you. So some of the other ways that we're planning to and have spent the money is we used it this summer for our programming to not only accelerate learning, but offer students opportunities to come back to school to socialize and engage in learning in the classroom in person. To get the students there, we use funding for transportation, and of course for the new Leave and Learns that we added this year, where students actually had the opportunity on Fridays to go on field trips to the Trevor Zoo, to Storm King, and for bowling. Additionally, to accelerate learning and get kids on track on grade level, we purchased AIS kits and hotspots and technology compliance so that students could access learning remotely and to communicate with families. So our district communication as well.
Okay, and we also, with the second stimulus, are going to allot $7 million towards upgrading our ventilation system. So as the community knows, we are currently, before COVID, we were engaging in an energy performance contract where we were updating our ventilation systems, as well as our larger capital projects and our Proposition 5 allow us to upgrade our current ventilation systems. We will be working with a consultant to see which of those units that we refurbish during this really would be more beneficial if we replace them completely. And each unit, cost approximately $12,000 to replace in its entirety. And we have over 750 classrooms. So we want to see which one of those vents really can we benefit and improve the quality by replacing the entire unit. We want to also see if there's any air handlers, ductwork, exhaust fans, and replacement of windows, as well as upkeeping with the MERV 13 filters. Every time we change the filters, it's approximately $30,000 to $35,000 each change. So we want to make sure that we're upkeeping with that and upgrading our facilities appropriately. We also want to explore, you could see here one of our schools with our outdoor dining here. We want to increase the use of our outdoor spaces for not only dining, but for educational purposes. So we want to look at additional, more permanent outdoor awnings and coverings. We were able to purchase some temporary structures and tents, but we realized that we would benefit from having shade, especially in the summer months, for learning and playing and engaging in activities outside, and also keeping up with the mask and being able to provide that not only to our scholars, but also to our staff members and any visiting guests that may need a mask. The next stimulus application is due this week. This is the American Rescue Plan. This is the third stimulus in which we have over 3 years to develop a plan for spending. Next slide, please. And this grant, the allowable spending, really is to focus on maximizing your in-person instruction, making sure that students are returning safety and for the in-learning instruction, making sure that you're addressing the impacts of COVID-19 that students have had interrupted learning, social emotional evidence-based strategies to increase what's trauma students may have experienced over these past 18 months, and highlight and focusing on early childhood education. So if you think about some of our youngsters that are going into second grade, this is their first time that they're experiencing in-person learning, and being able to purchase educational technology so that in the event that we had to pivot to remote, or that a student is experiencing quarantine or has to be home ill, they have access to technology to continue their learning at home. Next slide. So with this plan, we did engage in multiple meetings to have stakeholder input with teachers and administrators to discuss academic intervention and innovation strategies. We had stakeholder groups that we met with of parents, students, and staff members to elicit feedback on the plan. How and why should we spend this money? And where should we target the spending? And sharing and planning in collaboration with our bargaining units. So you may see some slight small changes because we did have a meeting with principals and bargaining units in which they were able to give us feedback based on our other stakeholder input. So that we might have some small changes there. And you've noticed that in previous board meetings, we'd had an opportunity to talk about this stimulus money and where we plan to appropriate the funding. Lisa?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Spindler. Good evening. So based on stakeholder recommendations and current data, these are the following recommendations that the Curriculum and Instruction Division has recommended to support our students. We want to create a tentative virtual academy, want to continue to enhance our curriculum with culturally responsive education, a research-based approach to teaching. We want to provide our students with academic tutoring, such as peer tutoring or evening virtual classes. We want to extend our school day and year-round programs. What that would look like, students will receive additional support on Saturdays, breaks, or after school or before during the summer. We want to staff our schools with reading teachers, hire additional TAs to support our students, and create a newcomer SIFE programs and develop a partnership with higher education to create an EML certification program. Thank you, Dr. Spindler.
Additionally, we're looking to implement an elementary instructional coach model at our elementary schools and at Meadow and Temple Hill to support ELA and math instruction. We are looking to offer to the buildings to build their own specific programming to accelerate learning. So buildings know their students best. They know what their SEL needs are, their academic needs are, and so the opportunity for them to work specifically with their students and with their families. And lastly, to continue to collaborate with higher ed to support early literacy. So for our youngest learners to set that foundation to ensure their academic success. Thank you, Dr. Spindler.
Okay, social emotional learning, Dr. Roman.
Thank you, Dr. Spindler. So when we look at social emotional learning, we're looking at ways in which we can best support students in school. And one of the things that we know through research is that when students are suspended, we're not changing the behavior. We may be re-traumatizing students. We know that that leads to the probability of students being suspended again, dropping out of school, or even engaging in the criminal justice system. And so we really want to make sure that we're getting to the root cause of behaviors and making sure that students are thriving in our schools. And so we're looking at alternatives to suspension so that we are approaching behaviors through a trauma-informed lens so that we can really identify what is it that students need, how do we close that gap, and how do we best support them moving forward. And so these are 3 different initiatives, starting with the trauma-informed reset rooms. That really is a space for students to be able to de-escalate, address what it is, whatever the issue is, and get them reintegrated back into the classroom. A divergent program is basically a detention room on steroids. It is to be able to have a space for students to be able to learn from their experiences. It's not a major infraction, it's a low-level infraction, but again, it's preventing them from possibly being suspended. This is, again, addressing the behaviors. If kids could do well, they will. And so we want to make sure that we ensure that they are explicitly taught pro-social behaviors. And then lastly, seminars in lieu of suspensions. Again, this is a higher tiered intervention. It's more like a tier 3 intervention. It really involves a stipulated agreement. Stipulated agreement is basically when all parties involved in a superintendent hearing are in agreement. This is a plan to address the behavior and be able to allow the student to continue to receive instruction, but not only instruction, to address their mental health needs. And so these are some supports that we're thinking about putting in place with these funds. Thank you.
Mr. Baird?
The Spindlers. So on the exceptional learner and pupil personnel side, we've identified a series of initiatives that we want to support through ARC. One is evidence-based reading support. We know that the predominant area of disability for our exceptional learners is in the area of reading. The second is an evaluation team. We recognize that as a result of COVID that we have to ensure that we are compliant with all students who require reevaluations and initial referrals. It was difficult to do that remotely. So we need to make sure that occurs. Additionally, we want to ensure that we are properly evaluating our Asian to kindergarten students. Some of them have had interrupted learning or chose not to avail themselves of preschool special ed services. So we need to ensure we have a proper understanding of their needs. We also, as I've mentioned many times through board meetings, we have close to 240 students who are outside the district in BOCES and day and residential. It's important that they also have opportunities for robust evaluations. And finally, the county is always seeking, because there are shortages for preschool evaluations, and they've offered the ability for schools to become a preschool evaluation site, and they would reimburse us. So that's what that evaluation team would do. We're looking at additional nursing support, giving some of the mandates for the Department of Health with regard to screenings for both adults and students. And then one of the ideas that we're considering is a pandemic response coordinator. Anyone who's lived this understands that we're constantly throwing new ideas, new challenges, and it was our job to unpack and disseminate and put a plan around all of the demands that are suddenly placed upon us, sometimes under very short timeframes. So we're looking at a medical professional who will support us in making sure that we stay on top of that. And finally, having a multi-tiered system of support to fully develop that this school year and have it developed, implemented, and provide the training and have staff who are provided support so they can do that work at the building level. Thank you.
So for technology, we see that we need the expansion of certain software systems to meet the needs of some of our in-need populations, our exceptional learners and our English language learners. We also want to increase within our community and with our staff and our support staff, digital literacy. We saw throughout the pandemic that basic computer skills and understanding. So we would like to collaborate with an area BOCES to provide that training for parents and for our staff members. We also need to make sure that our systems are protected. So our cybersecurity and updating our network and our infrastructure, as well as making sure that our staff understands the importance of cybersecurity, as well as personal identifiable information, or EdLaw 2D, that we are compliant and that we are offering those training programs. With the additional requirements placed on districts by EdLaw 2D, we would like to see the automation of that process. And what this will do is it'll assist teachers in making sure they get access to programs. There's a lot of free opportunities, but we still have to go through compliance. We would like to see that be automated for the district, as well as investing in a data visualization tool for the district that will help with preparing the district for a data culture. We know that we are facing the analysis of many students around learning and achievement, and we need to build a culture and a system where educators and administrators will be able to access data in a quick way with ease.
Okay, thank you. And a little bit more about finance and operations. You can see there that there's a lot of duplicates from the CRISA funding so that we can still continue to support the PPE items and increase outdoor learning spaces. You also see on here the transportation for extended school year program. Transportation is for extended school year after school Saturdays is not aidable. So we would like to utilize these resources so that we can provide transportation to those opportunities for students. And then increasing our part-time security so that they can help us with our attendance initiatives and help with collaborating with the community on getting kids to school. And then also trying to work with partnerships with our local law enforcement to develop youth programs and collaboration. And then you'll see here also a director of funded programs and a junior accountant to assist. These grants are considered a high risk for district. You want to make sure that you're staying within the allowable expenses. And there's nearly $50 million that has to be budgeted for and accounted for, as well as a lot of cost reporting that is due on a monthly basis in order for us to actualize the money. So recommending that this director be able to facilitate that, as well as looking at beyond the scope of these fundings, right? We're building these programs for students because we're addressing what happened during COVID, but what's going to happen when this funding is no longer there? So we're hoping that parallel to this grant, that the person would also be looking for other funding sources so that we can sustain some of these recommendations that we have. And that concludes this presentation of the federal stimulus money.
Thank you, Dr. Spindler and the other staff members. It was really, I thought it was very understandable. Mr. Stridiron, I see your hand.
Thank you, Madam President. So, I mean, this plan is very comprehensive as far as the amount of data that's involved. At what point were the other groups of people that are part of the shared decision-making brought into the process? Like, I don't know if this has been discussed in finance. It's the kind of the first time I've seen any of this information. And as part of the social emotional part, I see a lot for the students, which is great. But the pandemic has also hit families and staff members. What specific things in this plan will address the morale and the mental health of the staff members? Thank you.
So, Mr. Stridiron, there were a variety of different opportunities for stakeholder engagement. We had an outside facilitator actually work with representatives from each of the bargaining units to engage in this particular recommendation for expenditures that you're seeing tonight. We also met with principals. We met with bargaining unit presidents the other day to review the draft to get their feedback. But Dr. Spindler, can you go a little bit more specific with the actual participants that were on that facilitated team?
Yeah, sure. There were teachers, administrators, and then we also had an opportunity through our accountability teams when we were working in our strategic planning committees to also know that this was another funding source for us. So these conversations have been happening for months now. And now we're just getting to a point, we had to get through the CRISA funding, and the CRISA funding was presented during my budget presentations. You'll see there that when we were closing the budget gap and we were looking for what we wanted to see in this school year's budget, we did say that we would appropriate that $4 million for that. Note that this is over 2 years. So that's why during the budget presentation, you might have seen 1.7, but because it's over 2 years, you're seeing more money allocated there. Definitely a great point, Mr. Stridiron, to talk about not only the scholars' mental health, but definitely the adults. However, you heard me focus that there's allowable expenses in here. So we have to make sure to take that feedback that it's actually allowable. But we could definitely consider that maybe some of our general funding could be something, or other funding streams can help to support that. So I'll definitely take that feedback back to the team and we'll look into that. But like I said, there's very strict guidelines on how the money can be spent and what it needs to address and for whom it could be spent on.
Mr. Baer?
To Dr. Spindler's point, yes, this money is earmarked for certain initiatives. I just don't want to leave out though that we have things in place for the adults. So one example is Mr. Prokaj and his team at Meadow Hill created a Zen Den, and it's a place for teachers to go to decompress. There's a massage chair in there. There's all kinds of wonderful things. So there's ways to do this that I think we're very intentional about. Our PPS staff have signed up to do PPS self-care. So sometimes, the healer has to be healed as well. So they've all signed up. They're doing walks, they're doing painting, they're doing essential oil activities with each other, yoga. So we have a number of these that are done outside of this initiative.
Mr. Forget?
Yeah, and I just want to build on that because I think Mr. Stridiron, you're hitting on something. You know, we need to take care of the adults in order for them to take care of the children and the students in the district. I think that's a really great point. And I think when we look at the way we design and develop the professional development that's going to occur, we can build in the professional development for social emotional wellness of the adults so that they can then transform that same type of strategy and work with our students. And I think that's kind of the lens we have to take into consideration as we move forward the next couple of years. We have to take care of the adults as they begin to take care of the students. And I think it's a great idea. And I think C and I will sit down tomorrow and take a look at that.
Board members, any other questions or comments on this item? Thank you. I see no hands. I'm looking for Mr. Walker. No. Mr. Forget?
That would be it, Madam President. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Forget. Let's see where we are. We're now going to move on to the section of the agenda for public discussion and comments on agenda items. Please refer to the regulations regarding discussion and comments. Mr. McCoy?
We have one resident signed up to speak, Mr. Joseph Hayes. Just give me a minute. I'll let him into the room, man.
Hi, good afternoon. Hi, good afternoon.
Go ahead, Mr. Hayes.
Yes,
We can hear
thank
you.
Very good. First of all, before I begin, I would just like to compliment the educators working all day and then up at 10 o'clock at night is very impressive. Madam President, distinguished members of the board, other educators, parents, ladies and gentlemen, and our youths. Greetings and a happy Tuesday evening, and wishing all the very best in health and safety. Thank you for the opportunity and invitation to this meeting. My name is Joseph Haynes. Obviously, I live in the area and my children attend NFA. I appear today as a Valera Associate Ambassador to inform and educate you on a new sanitizer technology and to share an opportunity with you. As such, I am part of a team working across the United States and Canada to bring advanced personal protective equipment to the public and private sectors in this time of need and rising outbreaks and business struggling to remain open or to stay open. The opportunity is our wish for Newburgh to be one of the first in the Hudson Valley to partner with us and be on board with us. About the company is Valera. It's a 90-year-old company, United States company, and it's an international. It's committed to providing a life of healthy living in every home and business to leverage health and wellness through technology. Every one of these products saves you money, labor, time, while you enjoy a host of the benefits. About the product is an electronic air and surface purifier. The product is called the Air and Surface Pro. Since I don't have a visual as what I was told, it's an electronic device the size of about 2 shoes box put together. It weighs 7 pounds and runs about a light bulb amount of electricity. It uses certified space technology called Active Pure. Summary of the product's ability to purify. We are concerned today about dangerous things in the air and on surfaces. All that concern can now be scientifically addressed with Active Pure. This technology device cleans, sanitizes, and disinfects indoor space or mobile space. It sanitizes every inch of air and surface, every inch of your floor, walls, ceilings, shelves, tables, desks, chairs, your bags, any exposed surfaces. It eliminates molds, bacteria, virus, dust, smoke, volatile organic compounds, and other harmful contaminants where they exist, that is in the air and on surfaces. The device brings the solution to the problem where it is in the air and surface. This is done electronically at the push of a button without harsh chemicals continuously, even while the space is occupied. Eliminates asthma and allergy triggers. No chemical cost, no labor cost, no installation cost. It sanitizes at the molecular level. When I present to people, they always want to know who else in the industry that they are in uses this product. Here are some actual clients of the company. It's used by the Philadelphia school system. This is also in the press. Cleveland Clinic, a high-ranking hospital, uses it in their operating rooms. The national sports team and major baseball clubs in their locker rooms. Hospitals in Canada, bus companies.
Mr. Haynes, I'm going to
Yes.
make a suggestion
Sure.
that one of our assistant superintendents or our acting superintendent will contact you, because right now I'm not sure that this is the appropriate space for
Okay.
this discussion. And thank you for bringing this to our attention, but right now this is not really the appropriate space. So I'll have the clerk of the board. We have your information. He
Very
will
good.
forward it on to the appropriate people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate
Have a
it.
great evening.
Yes, and thank you for what you do for our children.
Thank you, sir. Take a deep breath. We're going to continue on. We're going to do board committees now. I'll do the Personnel Committee. All of the items that were discussed in Personnel Committee are on this agenda tonight. We're going to move on to Curriculum and Instruction Committee. Mrs. Maida.
Thank you, Madam. We had a wonderful presentation and about the research and that our two curriculum people are doing on transformative literacy. All of our directors had a part of that, and it was a wonderful way to begin our school year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Maida. We're going to move on to our Exceptional Learners Committee. Mrs. Burton.
Good evening, everyone. Exceptional Learners, we met last Wednesday, September 22nd, 2021. You'll see one of our resolutions in this agenda. We also had an enrollment, a special ed enrollment data update, which includes programs that are in each of the schools in the school district, including ICT, which is integrated co-teaching, embedded services in the schools, and some modified regions programs that are coming in effect. Regional Partnership Center, which will be providing some professional development of the 2021-2022 priorities. And so exceptional learners priorities also include pupil personal services, which includes our social emotional learning programs, including implementing trauma-informed multiple tier support, systems of support, implementing our school counseling guidance plan. Also, we talked about the need that one of the goals will be to demonstrate continued compliance with our SED measures. And then also, what did we talk about in terms of providing services to overage students and giving them the opportunity to return to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then the last priorities around health services, which will be to adhere to all the vaccination requirements and also to develop a district-wide website to include health services manual that contain essential COVID-related information for our families and students. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Mr. Levinstein, I see you have your hand up.
Madam President, if appropriate now in your section, I would like to bring up again a resolution for board meetings to be held in person.
Mr. McCoy, I need your help here. Is this appropriate in this section? Can we do this now?
Up to you, ma'am.
Okay. Do you have some wording for your resolution, Mr. Levinstein?
Yes. I would like to propose that as long as employees are required to report to buildings to work, that board meetings be in person. Details such as masks, proper distancing, maximum of people should mirror school building rules.
So I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
I need a second.
I'll second it.
Questions or discussion? I see, let me have Mr. Stridiron first, and then I'll get back to you, Mr. Levinstein.
Is this resolution for just board meetings or is it also for committee meetings?
My resolution would be for board meetings first. And I have a resolution for committee meetings. If we want to entertain that after this, or if we want to see how the board meetings go.
Let's see how the board meetings go. Okay, we'll do that one first. Any other questions or discussion on this item? Yes, Mr. Walker.
Yes, my question is, will the public be allowed to come and not wear masks and show proof of vaccination or anything like that?
I believe that Mr. Levinstein had said we will follow school district rules, so they have to wear masks. Proof of vaccination, no, that's not what the school district does. Correct, Mr. Levinstein?
Correct. And if there's maximum people per room that, based on square footage, we should follow those rules.
I thought the lawyer last time said that we couldn't do that.
We couldn't do what?
We couldn't say how many people could enter the room. We have no control. They could come.
Mr. Shaw?
There is a New York State Department of Health determination. It's from September 2nd that says that when students may be present in a building, that the adults who would be there would have to be masked and that there should be social distance maintained. And at this point, doesn't matter whether you're vaccinated or not. So I believe that to the extent that the proposed resolution is in harmony with the guidance from the New York State Department of Health, that's fine. But if it intends something else, then I think you need to consider making sure that you're following the state determination.
Does that mean we have no occupancy limits?
Well, you should have those who are in the room 6 feet apart and masked. And if you're going to have a big crowd, you may need a bigger room.
Mr. Stridiron.
Thank you, Madam President. I know that the board members are aware, but I'm sure the public is not aware that there was a threat on Facebook against, I believe it was me, but it could also be attributed to others on the board. And I'm not sure if there's going to be additional security at the meetings or how that would be handled. But I am concerned for my safety, but I've never backed down from a situation. And I've thought about this a lot because this is one of those situations where, this is a volunteer position. And I've had enough to deal with over the last 8 years. And for me to risk not coming home for certain situations. It's entirely understandable in my sense if I would have said no, if I say no to public meetings, but I'm not going to back down from this situation. I'm not going to let fear rule me. But I do understand if others on the board are concerned about safety, not just for COVID, but for their personal safety regards to issues that the board is currently dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stridarn. Any other questions or comments on this resolution? So we need a motion. We have a motion to add. Mr. McCoy, now I need.
Yeah, you have a current resolution on the floor that's been seconded to have board meetings in person in relation to the regulations for the Department of Health, masking, social distancing, etc.
So this vote would be to add it to the agenda.
I have it, sure, if you want, if that's the way you want to go. Yep.
Yes.
Add it first. Yep.
Okay. So everybody understand this motion is to add, and then we have to have another motion to approve. All right. So Mr. McCoy, roll call to add.
Ms. Burton,
Yes.
Ms. Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson,
No.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
No.
Ms. Mineo,
No.
Mr. Stridarn,
Yes.
Mr. Walker.
No.
That's 5 to add.
So now we have a motion on the floor. Now we're going to vote whether or not this motion goes through. So any other questions or comments right now? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
There was a motion to add, so now somebody has to have the motion to then.
Oh,
now
I'm
vote on this.
sorry. I'm sorry. We have to, I need another motion to put this on the floor, I guess.
So
Motion.
moved.
Second.
Okay. Any more questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Green,
No.
Dr. Henderson,
No.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
No.
Ms. Mineo,
No.
Mr. Stridarn,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
No.
Ms. Burton.
Yes.
That item fails.
Thank you. So Mr. Levinstein, we're going to pass on the discussion for the committees.
I would think so.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on the agenda to our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction Elementary, Mrs. Moriarty.
Thank you, Madam President. Curriculum Instruction Elementary presents items 5.1 through 5.4 as a consent agenda items for your consideration this evening.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? Okay, I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Hello? I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion on these items? Mrs. Burton.
Thank you. So my question is, are we paying these entities? And if so, how much? Because there's no indication in terms of the cost to the school district to offer services to these entities.
Madam President, may I respond?
Oh, sure. Yes, Mrs. Moriarty.
Thank you. These are federal funds through our title funding that are allocated a certain percentage. They're entitled to these funds. This is an annual resolution to provide them with the funding for Title I, II, and Title IV.
It's a per pupil usually based on per pupil, isn't it, Mrs. Moriarty?
Yes, Madam President, it is per pupil allocation.
All right. No, I understand that, Madam President, but is there any indication from past usage, how much is it? I mean, I understand what you said, but it's per pupil. So we should have, at this point, some indication of how many pupils they have. School started, 3 weeks ago.
Yes, and I can provide that information.
I'm
in the
just
weekly.
curious on how much it costs. That's all. Thank you.
Mrs. Moriarty, can we add this into the weekly? That might be a good help for Mrs. Burton and the rest of us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion? Mr. Forget.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention to Ms. Burton, this is clearly delineated in the title grant that's submitted with a consolidated application. That calculation is created, the per pupil is in there, and that's how we receive the funds. We have to document that. So that application was submitted to the State Education Department, so it will not be something that will take long. We'll give it to you immediately, and it is clearly defined in those documents.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Forget. Any other questions or discussion on these items? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard, Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
Yes.
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Burton,
Yes.
Ms. Green.
Yes.
Mr. Howard, you there?
Yes.
Passes. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes.
Thank you. Got it.
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes my items.
Thank you, Mrs. Moriarty.
My
We're going
Wi-Fi's
to,
not picking up.
Mr. Howard, please mute yourself. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Exceptional Learners, Mr. Baer.
Thank you, Madam President. Exceptional Learners has 2 items, item 8.1, 8.2, on a consent agenda for the board's consideration.
Thank you. Would any member like to separate out any of these items? Okay. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So
So
moved.
second.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Mr. Stridiron.
Can the board get some clarification in the Board of Ed Weekly on the situation where IEPs are being changed? Kind of in a way that it may not be the proper process. Can just the board be filled in on that at some point? Because I'm hearing that there's a lot of IEPs being changed, children being moved from 811s to 1211s. Thank you.
Mr. Baer, do you understand the parameters of what Mr. Stridiron is asking?
Answer here that we don't do anything without committing out special education meetings or preschool meetings or through an IEP amendment, no meeting. We don't move kids without the formal proceedings occurring. If there's specifics, I'm certainly willing to have board members reach out to me, but I'm not aware.
Mr. Stridiron, if you know of particular cases, please let me know, or we can let Mr. Baer know so we can, follow up.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Howard, Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
Yes.
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Burton,
Yes.
Ms. Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Baer.
Sorry, that concludes my items.
Thank you, sir. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Finance, Dr. Spindler.
Thank you, Madam President. Finance presents to you items 7.1 through 7.6 for the board's consideration.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
Yes.
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Burton,
Yes.
Ms. Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard. Mr. Howard. That item passes.
Thank you. I think Mr. Howard is frozen on and off.
That concludes my items for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Spindler. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, Mr. McLemore.
Thank you, Madam President. On the Human Resources agenda, I have items 8.1 through 8.26 for your consideration on tonight.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? Yes, Mr. Stridiron?
8.2 and 8.16.
Anybody else want to separate out anything? So I'd like to entertain a motion on all but 8.2 and 8.16.
So moved.
Second,
Questions or discussion on those items, not the two that I mentioned? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Maida,
yes.
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Burton,
Yes.
Ms. Breen,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard.
I'm frozen. Hello?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes or no?
Hello?
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear you. Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein.
Yes.
You're muted, ma'am.
Sorry, I was really going there. I'd like to, but let's move on to item 8.2, please. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Can I have a second? Thank you.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Mr. Stridiron?
Thank you, Madam President. So I did send over a list of questions. I'm not sure if it was received or not, but I did ask for the job posting for this position. I know on the job description, it lists some items, but I wanted to make sure that the job posting and the job description matched. What's the purpose of this actual creation of this position? Because we have so many other needs in our district. To have another administrator to deal with communications. I mean, yes, communications with the families is very important, but to have another administrator to do this when we have so many other needs, I just find it mind-boggling. Thank you.
Mr. Forget, would you like to answer that, please?
Sure. So I believe it's so that transparency can be improved, communication can be improved. When immediate attention needs to be paid to an emergency situation, that can be executed. I think somebody looking from the balcony view at patterns and trends of communication to improve it, to guide school administrators and to guide, parent teacher organizations in how to effectively communicate and how to publicly promote the programs and the items that we're trying to do within the district. I think that needs a level of leadership to do that. Someone that can take a very complex document and put it into very teacher-friendly or student-friendly or parent-friendly language to be able to have that communicated, setting a standard of SOPs for communication and making sure that there's consistency in the way we react and communicate to specific situations across the buildings. I think that type of expectation is what we're looking for in this leader that can work with a specialist to pull the work off. I believe that was the intention of this particular position when it was talked about. And Mr. McLemore, correct me if I'm wrong, because I think you and Dr. Padilla really worked on this. But I believe that was the intention.
Thank you. Mr. Levinstein, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just want to point out that a lot of the things that I thought were issues in this district always seem to revolve around communication. And that's something I've always said. So I think someone maybe at the helm that can steer this, clear communications to parents, clear communications to teachers and employees. I think that's something that this district could use. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Stridiron, I see your hand again.
So as a follow-up to what Mr. Forget said regarding when this position was thought of, this position was created, not created, but thought about as a need months ago. So this has been in the works for a long time. So is there a job posting? Were there interviews done, and how many people interviewed for the job?
Mr. McLemore, can you respond?
Yes, I have to.
Madam President, did you get my list of questions?
Yes, sir, and I forwarded them on. Yes, I did.
Oh.
I just looked
respond.
Thank you.
I looked it up on my phone, and yes, I forwarded it to Mr. Forget and Dr. Spindler and Mr. McCoy, as well as Mr. Howard.
So
Go
it
ahead,
did,
Mr. McLemore.
I'm sorry, Ms. Mineo, it did take us a little time to pull that because of everything else that we were working on, and it was submitted to Mr. McCoy late this afternoon.
Mr. McLemore, would you like to address some of the issues there, please?
Thank you, Madam President. So there were 10 people who applied for this position.
Madam President, can I ask clarification, please?
Yes, sir.
I think this resolution is to create the position, not appoint the position. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Stridiron, I think your question should be on hold until the next, until we have a resolution to appoint somebody, because right now we're only in the creating the position spot, okay?
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question? Roll call, Mr. Clerk?
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron,
No.
Mr. Walker,
No.
Ms. Burton,
Yes.
Ms. Green,
No.
Dr. Henderson,
No.
Mr. Howard,
He's giving you a thumbs up.
yes, I see it. Mr. Levinstein,
Yes. Yes.
Ms. Maida.
Yes.
That item passes.
Thank you. We're going to move on to item 8.16. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Questions or discussion? Mr. Stridiron.
Thank you, Madam President. So this position is for a special ed teacher at Heritage Middle School. And the person that is on the approval list here is a recent graduate from Mount St. Mary's College who has never taught special ed before. We had someone in the district who applied for the job, has been a special ed teacher in the district for 15 years and was not granted an interview for the job. How is it possible that that situation can occur when we're dealing with special ed students? Shouldn't we have someone teaching special ed students who's actually taught special ed students in the past, or at least has certification in special ed? Thank you.
Mr. Shaw, is this exec discussion or is this floor discussion?
I think that it doesn't really identify individuals, but as I understand the resolution, it's to fill a position, not to the exclusion of already appointed people. Where they're assigned is another matter.
Thank you, sir. Board members, are there any other questions or comments on this item? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Stridiron,
No.
Mr. Walker,
No.
Ms. Burton,
No.
Ms. Green,
No.
Dr. Henderson,
Can anybody hear me?
Dr. Henderson,
No.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
Yes.
Ms. Mineo.
Yes, and we did hear you, Mr. Howard.
I'm sorry.
That item fails.
Okay. Mr. McLemore?
That concludes my items, Madam President.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our clerk of the board, Mr. McCoy.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the approval of the minutes from the September 14th and September 21st meetings.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second that.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Burton,
Yes.
Ms. Green, Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard, I see your thumbs up. That's a yes. Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
Yes.
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron.
Yes.
That concludes my items.
It's yes.
Thank you, Ms. Green. That concludes my items, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. We're now at the portion of the agenda for public discussion on non-agenda items. Please refer to the procedures. Mr. McCoy, do we have anybody for non-agenda items or anything to read?
We have one comment submitted. They asked me to read for them. This comment was submitted, there's two different items, and these were both submitted by Denise Bell. Madam President, members of the board, I recently watched the video playback of the mid-September Board of Education meeting. At the end of this meeting, there was a discussion that was not on the agenda that covered the logistics of upcoming BOE meetings. I was gobsmacked by the decision of the board to conduct their meetings remotely while students, teachers, and staff of every school in this district are required to attend in person daily. We have classrooms with up to 30 people in them, and this district wants us to believe it is safe for our children to attend up to 9 periods a day with this many students 5 days a week with no remote option. Yet the 9, 4 voting against and 4 in person, and 1 member not in attendance. Members of this board can't gather together 1 to 2 times a month. I'm sure in a room much larger than a classroom. What message are you sending? Why aren't you meeting in person? Is it not safe? Is it not convenient? Are you better or more important than our students, teachers, and staff? It's unconscionable that there is a double standard. As a parent of students in the district, I find it completely unacceptable that the BOE is not for it, following the same in-person attendance guidelines as other employees and students of the district are required to abide by. Item 2. I am the parent of 2 children who currently attend at FA main campus. On the first day of school this year, one of my 2 children came home and told me that they have a teacher that is giving each child in the classroom 4 bathroom passes per quarter, and that if the student does not use any of their passes at the end of the quarter, the teacher will reward the student with a 100 grade on a quiz for the quarter. My child added, quote, "That is so unfair to girls," unquote. I wish I could tell her that I'm surprised by this blatant sexist policy, but sadly, nearly every year since my oldest was in 6th grade, we've had one or the other children have at least one teacher with this kind of policy. I have previously spoken with teachers and administration about these kinds of policies and have been assured that they should not be occurring yet year after year. Some variation of the limitations, penalties, or incentives regarding bathroom usage reappears. In the past, I've had people say to me, "It's not that big of a deal. Go to the bathroom in between classes." But I hope you are already aware all student restrooms are locked during the passing time, so no students can use the restrooms during passing time. This means that only opportunity a student has to go to the restroom is during classroom time. Why these kinds of policies are potentially a health hazard for both boys and girls, since not relieving yourself in a timely manner can lead to many medical problems such as urinary tract infections, kidney or bladder infections, constipation, and can exacerbate problems like enterocrisis. These kinds of policies are blatantly sexist and discriminatory against girls. By the time girls get into the middle school, and certainly by the time that they are at school, all female students are regularly menstruating. All girls should not have to choose between attending their personal needs and attaining bonus points. They also shouldn't have to worry about the embarrassment of having an accident because they are out of the bathroom passes for the quarter. They shouldn't have to lie to ask to go to the nurse's office when they really need is access to the restroom. They shouldn't have to divulge to the teacher the reasons they need an extra pass to go to the bathroom. All these only apply to girls. Some people maybe say, oh, it's only the bonus points. But what happens when your child is running for valedictorian, salutatorian, and those few points can make a big difference? Or if your child is on the other end of the spectrum and those couple of points can make the difference between passing and failing. Are you really doing better or worse in class just because you didn't make use of the restroom? I think not. For those of you thinking of other possible times to use a restroom like study hall or lunch break, that's nice if you have one. Each of my children have had at least 1 year where due to scheduling challenges, they did not have a lunch or study hall at all on either A or B days. On those days, they not only had to figure out when they could go to the restroom, they also had to figure out how they were going to get something to eat. Pre-pandemic, they usually could make arrangements with teachers to grab a sandwich in the cafeteria and eat in the classroom. In fact, this is advice that guidance counselors often give to students, but since the pandemic, this is no longer possible. And as an aside to the point of my address this evening, perhaps we can discuss this in the future. I'm addressing you today to request that the district enact a policy that explicitly prohibits teachers from limiting, penalizing, or incentivizing the use of restrooms. I know that policies can take time to enact, so I'm requesting that every principal and teacher in the district be notified immediately that these types of policies are health hazards and discriminatory and will not be permitted or tolerated. Thank you for your attention and consideration of my concern. And that is the end of the public comment on non-agenda items, Madam President.
Thank you, sir. Be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby recesses into executive session for the following purpose: employment history of particular individuals and to obtain advice from legal counsel. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Burton,
Yes.
Ms. Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard, Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
Yes.
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Strinine,
Yes.
Mr. Walker.
Yes.
We may be doing business when we return. Thank you. We'll see you in a bit. Roll call to table.
Ms. Burton,
I don't see her anymore.
I was having trouble logging on myself and being promoted as a panelist, so it might just need a couple extra minutes. I'm not sure.
I'm here.
I
there she is.
apologize.
There she is.
I'm
Okay.
here. We didn't have discussion, but now we have another motion.
Hey, Ed, the person downstairs went home, the
Hold
alarm
on.
in the library.
When somebody makes a motion to table, we have to do that first. And then that motion does not have to
No.
carry.
No.
Thank you. Continue, please, Mr. McCoy.
Ms. Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard,
No.
Mr. Levinstein,
No.
Ms. Maida,
No.
Ms. Mineo,
No.
Mr. Strinine,
Yes.
Mr. Walker.
No.
That motion fails.
Okay, Mr. Howard, I see you have your hand up.
Oh, no. I didn't move to lower it. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Ms. Green, do you have another comment? Because your hand
Oh, I'm
is still
sorry.
up.
I meant to take off lower hand. It was just on by mistake. Sorry.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? We have a motion on the floor. Yes, Mr. Howard, go ahead.
I did have a question, Madam President. So, Madam President, if this does not go through this evening, is there a classroom without a teacher? And if there is, how are we filling that position in the interim? And how long will that process take to go another round or look for someone else?
Mr. Forget, can you help us with that?
I would, after your decision, have to contact Ms. Lane to find that information out. And then we would have to schedule request a sub for tomorrow morning. But I would have to research that with Ms. Lane after this decision is made.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Mrs. Burton.
So who's in the classroom today? Is she considered a sub now?
Mr. Forget.
I will get you the answer in 2 seconds.
Let's move on to Ms. Green's question, and then we'll come back to your question, Mrs. Burton, okay? Go ahead, Ms. Green.
That was pretty much going to be my question. Can they get a sub in there until whenever? That was going to be my question.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Forget, whenever you're ready.
Ms. Roach is subbing in that classroom as we speak. She is scheduled to sub tomorrow. So depending upon what you do, she will either be a teacher tomorrow that is provisionally certified in that particular position, or she will be a sub. It will be dependent upon your vote.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I just have a question for the attorney. So, Mr. Shaw, there's a motion to reconsider. Do they just have to vote once, or do they have to vote twice? That's my only question.
In other words, we have to add it back to the agenda.
Yeah, it has to be added back to the agenda and then voted upon.
All right.
And
So
my
this
question is this position a vacancy? Or is it encumbered by someone?
Mr. Forget?
I believe it's a vacancy and it's filled currently by a substitute.
Okay, well, the vacancy is not supposed to be filled by a substitute.
It's a substitute covering the vacant class until we hire a permanent position, a teacher.
I understand. A substitute, someone expected to return. It's a nuance of the education law. So you should be appointing either a probationer or here a contract in lieu of probation.
Okay. Now, the first round of voting is going to be to add this to the agenda. So we had a motion, we had a second, so a roll call to add.
Ms. Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
Yes.
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron,
No.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Burton.
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
I'm not doing questions or discussion. Roll call
Dr.
on
Henderson,
this item.
Yes.
Mr. Howard.
What are we voting on, Madam President? I just
We're
need
voting
clarity.
on 8.16, whether or
To
not
do
to
it
approve
now.
the appointment.
Okay, yes.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
Yes.
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron,
No.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Burton,
Yes.
Ms. Green.
Yes.
Thank you. Do I have to read the thing again about going into executive session?
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Okie dokie. So let me find that. All right. Be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby recesses into executive session for the following purpose: employment history of particular individuals and to obtain advice from legal counsel. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida, Ms. Beneo,
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Burton,
Yes.
Ms. Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson.
Yes.
Thank you. I need everybody except for, you got 5.
Good evening, Madam President. I've started the recording back up.
Thank you, and thank you for your patience, everybody, board members and everybody else. I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting, please.
So moved.
Can I have a
Second.
second? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Burton,
Yes.
Ms. Green, Dr. Henderson, Mr. Levenstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida. Ms. Maida, that's a yes. Mr. Walker,
Yes.
that passes.
And me, Ms. Mineo, yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. See you.